we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.
Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation while asking the question, is anything what it seems? Based on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will, as it might give you some insight into what the podcast is all about. I also hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel, Better Than Not, so I can continue to bring you great guests like we have today. My name or host is Doug Gardup, and today it's a pleasure to welcome, I'll say, internationally renowned cellist Roman Borys of the Gryphon Trio. Roman, how are you?
I'm very well. I'm enjoying the prospect of spending some time speaking with you.
Oh,
Yeah, about
well,
all
cool.
things having to do with chamber music.
It's very much a privilege for me to get to chat with you. But a little clear, today Roman is actually artistic and executive director of Music Toronto. He's also holds or is awarded an honorary doctorate from Carleton University, which is my alma mater. So we'll probably talk a little bit about that as well. He's also a founding member of the Gryphon Trio. And that is what kind of brings us here today, because this is the second in our series of the Valley Concert Society here in Abbotsford, of performances that are happening here at the Matsqui Centennial Auditorium. The Gryphon Trio will be performing on Friday, November 14th at 7:30. And if any of the previous performances are an indication of what you will witness, you will be blown away. It's an intimate auditorium where you will get to see, as I've already mentioned, internationally renowned artists. And in this case, it's the Gryphon Trio, which kind of brings me, Roman, as I get into this. You've been together as a trio, am I correct, for like 30 years?
33, actually.
33 years. So did you have any idea when you began that you would run as a trio? You founded this with your wife, Anna Lee, as I understand.
Yes, and she actually wasn't quite my wife. We had
Oh, wow.
a brief 14-year courtship. And
That's
then,
cool.
and of course, then Jamie Parker, the pianist in the trio,
Yes.
sort of presided as the MC over our wedding, and
Amazing.
has ever since been sitting between us and keeping the peace.
So Jamie married you?
No, he didn't. He didn't
Oh,
quite preside, but he was the
okay.
MC at uh,
Okay.
at the
That's
reception.
cool.
And there's a whole sort of digression we could get off on, and maybe we will at some point. And that is Jamie Parker's
Yes.
variety of a multitude of persona on Facebook and social media. You know, that it's the answer to the question. You know, how does an ensemble that's been playing, it started playing in 1993, adapt and respond to things like social media and these various different ways of
Well,
connecting with people.
you would have seen all of this, Roman. Like you would have seen the start of it. But
Yeah.
to the first question, did you have any idea that you were
Uh,
forming something that was going to
Well,
last?
you know, how can I mean I must say in my youthful sort of way, and it's been a kind of an energy and a perspective that has kind of always carried me. I could see that there was a plausible that it was plausible that a really great career in chamber music could happen. Anna Lee and I and Jamie, actually, the three of us first met at the Banff Center in the '80s. It was the center. The summer programs, in particular, at the center were really hopping then, and they were very focused on the needs of artists who are in our station. We needed to meet as Canadians, we had the benefit of some excellent training in places like Vancouver and Calgary and Toronto, where we're all from. But the Banff Center, in those years, the music programs were under the direction of Tom and Isabel Rolston, and they had a very good sense of what it was that Canadians, sort of a broad range. I mean, there was like a golden sort of 50-year period where there were these great European masters were coming to the Banff Center and giving classes. It was by
wow.
today's standards, not standards, but let's just say that was a little more exceptional then. It wasn't as common. There were places in Europe. There were places like uh, well, there are a number of Aspen and places like that, programs in the Berkshires, in Massachusetts, that had very high level programs and opportunities for musicians, but it was unique. I mean, while the Banff Center did have an orchestra component that was tied to its opera program, the rest of the training was all sort of solo training and chamber music. And so I met János Starker there, the great Hungarian cellist. I met Aldo Periso there, the great, Brazilian cellist. Menachem Pressler, the great, in fact, one of they were all very inspiring mentors for me. But Pressler in particular, as the pianist of the Beaux-Arts Trio, playing together with Isidore Cohen and Bernard Greenhouse for many years in that configuration. I mean, Pressler played in the trio for over 50 years, and the string players, occasionally changed. But that configuration was a great inspiration to me, and I had their recordings as a teenager, and I just always thought, trio, it required that each player had sort of combined attributes of a great chamber musician, somebody who really could play with other people, make space for other people, but also that of a soloist, a little different. And I spent, a relatively considerable amount of time in string quartets as a teenager. Actually, there was always a string quartet going there, and so I knew what that was all about, and that was different, and that's a whole other challenge. So to answer your question, yes, it was there was something about playing in a piano trio that, particularly when I got to Indiana University with Anna Lee and was studying with Pressler regularly, that really became the flame. That was the thing that I thought I would be doing. And, I always, I think, we were lucky while we were there, there were some extraordinary players there, including Joshua Bell, who was a personal friend and is from Bloomington, Indiana, and was, just a little younger than we were, and was growing up there, and was this great superstar, and was part of our whole community. But we could see what he could do already then. And there were, Leonidas Kavakos was there too. He's another one there's so many. There were so many great soloists that came out from that generation, and lots of great chamber players and concert masters and members of orchestras, and you name it. It was a huge school, and like the Juilliard of the Midwest that it was, it produced a lot of it helped to develop a lot of great talent. But in the midst of all of that, somehow I let myself I could just see, based that was something I could do. Pressler, Menachem Pressler, was a very big mentor for Anna Lee and myself. We actually started playing in a trio in I guess it must have been 88 or something like that. We'd been there already, and we had studied with Pressler as members of different ensembles, sort of summer ensembles, you could say, in Banff. And we discovered that we we met and we discovered that we were both going to be in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah.
Then that fall, actually, of 85. It's not 88, it's 85. And we told we asked Mr. Pressler, said, listen, can we study chamber music with you when we're in Bloomington? And this is a guy that was, he was doing, I don't know how many concerts with his trio all over the world,
Oh, wow.
as a soloist all over the world, constantly traveling, showing up in Bloomington, having a little rest in his studio, and knock on his door come these young musicians for an 8 a.m. coaching. That was fun when it followed a day of international travel on his part. It
No,
was like,
no.
oh boy, better get this right. But anyhow, that was very inspiring. Annalie and I played for 7 years with a student of Pressler's, and that was actually sort of career in chamber music part one. That group, 7 years, even 7 years, we accomplished many things. But at that point, that group ceased, and Annalie and I wanted to continue playing trios, and we eventually we connected with some friends, and one of whom was Jamie Parker, and
Okay.
and it just like one concert to another, and it just, before you knew it, we were off to the races, and our name was the Gryphon Trio. And it kind of kept going. Not too long after that, Jamie finished up his doctorate at Juilliard, and not too long after that, he got his first job as piano professor at Wilfrid Laurier University,
Oh,
which was a
wow.
very great thing, because that's employment and
Yes.
revenue and some sort of job is, that's a very challenging thing for early career musicians, particularly pianists. So it was a very fortunate thing that Jamie got that job, because fine, he wasn't in Toronto, but he wasn't far. It was
Right.
just a 9 hours, a little over an hour drive, just and I used to really enjoy driving back and forth, and occasionally he'd come here, and pursuing a career in chamber music was certainly something that university was very much
Embraced.
support of. And then Annalie got actually, and then Jamie eventually, after a number of years, got the position, was invited to, applied for an open position at the University of Toronto, and was awarded that position. And
Oh,
not
wow.
long after that, Annalie got the position, or the violin position there. So both of them have been tenured professors there. And that's, career stamina and stability
That's huge.
is
That's
something that we talk about.
no, for sure.
That's, had the two of them not had those jobs, it may have been different. So anyhow, I could keep talking about all
No.
that, but where should we go next?
Well, what I was interested in is kind of, you've talked about you're now into playing a lot. Do you remember, like, when it first struck you that you kind of, like, you have a gift and that you could play, and started to put that together? Do you remember, like, the timing of what happened?
um, I don't, it's, one's relationship with one's instrument and one's voice.
Yeah.
That's a very unique thing. It's a very personal thing for everybody. And there was I think I always felt that I had things to say
Okay.
as a
Okay.
player. I
Cool.
wasn't always, aware of that, what it was specifically. But I think something, musical lines, musical dialogue, for me, is something that I think the dialogue gets, very sort of personified. I do see it very much. Chamber music as being a conversation, and, sort of without words. And I think that I started, to just develop a way of speaking, um, or speaking the lines given to me by the composers whose music I'm playing, but somehow doing it in a way that also I think is quite clear and personal. And I don't know, there was a time where that just started to be very apparent to me that that's what we were all doing.
Interesting.
And and that became, I don't know. I mean, I think that dialogue and the presence of that dialogue between the three of us is something that people often
Right.
remark on when they've heard us play. Just it's something, that just, it's like we don't actively come out and say, okay, we want to make sure that after this concert, this people have this sense that we're all really talking to each other. But of course, we don't do that. We're just all diving into the music, and we've learned to engage, to perform music together, to rehearse it, to prepare it, but then perform it is like a whole other thing. Again, that's a different kind of thing. When we work on things in
Absolutely.
rehearsals, we set certain plans and work out certain things. I mean, when it's a brand new contemporary piece, we just kind of push through this new thing. What is
Right.
it? Kind of peel away and discover it, make it ours. Anyhow, that's
Did you always play the cello? Like, did you start on the cello, or like as
yeah.
a
In fact,
child?
I remember the day that my first cello teacher, Sharita Holod, who's still a friend and
Cool.
who was a cellist herself, and she'd studied with Tsuyoshi Tsutsumi, and who was, was this great Japanese cellist that had also studied with Janos Starker a couple of generations before me, and landed a job. I mean, he's from from Japan entirely. Came to Bloomington, and eventually got a job at Western University,
Okay.
and in London, Ontario.
Yeah,
So there was
absolutely.
this amazing cellist, and so Miss Holland studied with him there, and she came back to Toronto, and she eventually had a career as a performer, but then more as an educator. And she was actually the head of the music program at the Etobicoke School of the Arts, which is a really
Etobicoke.
big,
Yes.
one of the big arts
Yeah.
high schools. And so, but she was my first teacher. I remember the day that she walked into our house. I have two younger brothers, and there's big commotion in the house. My mother was a piano teacher. In fact, she had
Okay.
studied. She was a member of the first graduating class of the University of Alberta music department. It had been just a big arts department, but she was part of the cohort that actually was coming out as graduates of the School of Music at U of
Okay.
A. And one of her, she was a pianist, but pianists, everybody that goes into a music degree has to take, just to establish some sort of proficiency in another instrument. For string players or wind players, it's almost always piano. But for pianists, it's either choir and or some other instrument, and that other instrument for my mother was the cello. And in fact,
Ah.
her
Okay.
her teacher was Tom Ralston, who eventually, with his wife Isabel Moore, became those big leaders of the Banff Center. They were in Edmonton at
Interesting.
that time, and their daughter Shauna Ralston is, I think, 1 year younger than I am. So we've known each other our entire lives, pretty much. And in any case, so Tom Ralston told my mom, it's too bad you didn't play the cello. It was very good. You have a thing for the cello. So then I came
They passed it
along
on to
as
Roman.
the oldest of three boys, and voila, there appeared a cello in the hands of Sharita Holod, and this is the thing you're going to do. And I remember that, but it's strange, I had I'm I used to enjoy playing. Getting me to practice was, getting myself to practice. I mean, I had this, I'd feel very guilty and uncomfortable if I didn't practice, and yet getting myself to practice was some kind of trick that my
Interesting.
mother helped me with. She in her favorite pair of Dr. Scholl's clogs, helped me with that. That
So she
was
was a big support for you.
Oh, massive. And, she's still, she's still a pair of ears she has a pair of ears and perspectives on all things music and arts that I still value tremendously,
Well,
and am lucky to have.
I'm always intrigued, Roman, when and in the younger years of how parental support of a like in the particular world of arts, it's like everyone seems to take that so-called piano lesson or whatever, and they go and take it. They don't want to practice or whatever. But there are those that are gifted and really identify with the instrument that they learn. But often I'll call it in the middle class world, it's like, okay, that's great, but like you're 14 or 15, what are you going to do for a job? And often I find in talking with many musicians, there's an enormous support that comes from the parental world. And it seems like you had a similar experience to that with your mom.
I mean, I did. I mean, it started with my mom, and I had great, there was Sharita Hollowed, there was this wonderful older teacher, gentleman. I mean, it was, we were like four generations apart. Marcus Aideny, and Marcus was 90 when he was teaching me, and I was 15 and
Oh,
16.
wow.
And he had you know I mean, he told, the stories he could tell and the experiences and the perspective. I mean, he was a very wise man. Talk about philosophers, and I would sit there for these 3-hour lessons, and it just kind of take stuff in, um, and sort of be quite comfortable if I didn't understand what he was talking about, or if I didn't really know how to, put together, the teachings of this philosopher over that, or Casals. I mean, I was in any case, it was a very special experience and opportunity I had. I eventually went on to study with Robert Dodson, who was a cellist, clearly a cellist, but he was
Mhm.
also the principal of the conservatory, the Royal Conservatory, in those days. And
Okay.
and he was and he was a pupil of Janos Starker's, and he was a pupil that stayed in very close contact with Janos Starker, and in his position at the conservatory was able to bring Janos Starker to Toronto. It turned out that one of Starker's daughter actually was married to somebody and was living in Toronto. So that was certainly a motivation. And I mean, he had a particular connection through that and the Banff Center to Canada. But he anyhow, so I had, it was lucky that I had some connections to some, to somebody like Starker. I mean, really one of the top teachers on the planet
Amazing. Amazing.
in those years, and I had this kind of channel to that, and then I went off, and the whole cohort actually, when I was at the conservatory as a kid. This is the Royal Conservatory. There was this
Yes.
program for talented young kids, the scholarship program or the gifted program, or I mean, it's gone through all sorts of names. It's now called the Taylor Academy,
Okay. Yeah.
and so it continues. And there, the cohort of was very strong in my year. So Martin Beaver was there, Barry Schiffman. So Martin Beaver
Oh,
went on to Bloomington actually as well. We didn't cross paths there, but he eventually did really was the pride of Canada. Did one of the top prize winners at the Queen Elizabeth competition in Brussels many years later, and then eventually became the first violinist of the Tokyo String Quartet. And during those years, the Tokyo was certainly one of the top 5 string quartets on the planet, and he played in every major venue. So there's Martin, people like Barry Schiffman, who was a member of the St. Lawrence Quartet, and like me, Barry was always the to kind of put yeah, a term on it. I mean, he and I were both sort of the hustlers in our groups. You had to have somebody
okay.
who was in just figuring out where the opportunities were going to come
Sure.
from. We knew that there wasn't going to be, that somebody wasn't just going to knock on our door with a silver platter and say, "I've heard of you guys." You haven't played anywhere, but somehow I know about you guys, and I'm going to give you this amazing career. We understood that. Barry understood that as a member of the St. Lawrence Quartet, and I understood that as, I mean, we all of us did in both groups, but we you needed to go out there and you needed to make things happen for
Yep.
yourself.
Yep. Yep.
You needed to pay attention. What was out there? What were the challenges? I mean, through our entire career, classical music has been classical
Yes.
music has been in decline. Audiences are shrinking. Well, what we've learned is, there's always been that impression that classical music and audiences are in decline. That's why the BBC proms were actually, that whole concept was designed by a couple of fellows in London, that really felt, I mean, I don't entirely know what all of their motivations were, but certainly one of their concerns was that classical music was losing its audience. So there needed to be some sort of a welcoming, spectacular series of events, which has grown over the years to be the BBC Proms, a whole
Yes.
festival of big concerts and thousands of people and the crazy energy. So that was designed in the 1900s, because classical music was in decline. Look, it's always been a challenge. We knew that as Canadians, as people who wanted to come back to Canada. I mean, we were all very fortunate to be able to go away. Annalie left Calgary when she was 15 to study at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Jamie, eventually went to Juilliard to do his master's and his doctorate. Annalie and I both were in Bloomington. I went on to Yale eventually. And so we were very, very lucky to be able. And the thing was, those schools are still all doing great things. But what was particularly special about our going to those schools at that time was that we were at that time, the priority was to study with a particular teacher, cellist, pianist, violinist. I mean, that was paramount. That, like, all the other stuff, the whole education that came with it, that didn't matter. You were going to a place because you believed that teacher was going to do the best thing for you. That's actually really changed, a lot. I mean, there are absolutely musicians out there who are great pedagogues, and who and then that also perform. But I'd say that the average level of pedagogy has just gone through the roof. I mean, with every generation. I mean, people like Starker put so much structure around um, just approach to cello, approach to musicianship. I mean, so many great musicians, and with every they passed that on. That was processed by, Starker must have also taught for 50 or 60 years. So many students that then processed that, made it their own, took it to the next level, and so on and so forth. And so now, there are a lot of people who really know how to teach, young musicians, and you see evidence of that. You see these 14, 15-year-olds. I mean, I worked with a 10-year-old cellist this last summer that was just already flying around, and had a facility, and a kind of a natural approach to the instrument that would certainly support an evolving deeper and deeper sense of musicianship and artistic curiosity. Could support all of that. It wasn't, in any case, it's an interesting world. There are a lot of people that can really play and do all sorts of things these days, and I'm not exactly sure how many right and left turns I've taken to get myself to this point, Doug. So perhaps next question.
but they're going in the right direction. Well, this is one of the things that, like, I kind of recognized with going to the Valley concert series and the talents that have come in there, because you get to, as the audience, as a person who's participating in in the audience and participating with what you're hearing, kind of mind-blowing talent. And I know that's not a particularly artistic way of explaining it, but it kind of amazes me that there's not more of an appreciation for it. Hence why I want to talk about it more, because I think that if people recognize not only the gifted talent, but how it comes together. And that's where we kind of got into the Gryphon trio, but it's like when you start to go there as a trio now, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And you kind of just touched on that earlier on. But when you start to become part of that, Roman, what does that feel like? Like how does that connect with you as an artist? To 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 see like I can play, but when I come into this trio, we just become something else.
Well, that's no. I mean, it's a comfortable place. It's a place
Yes.
that we can all take certain risks and know that we'll support each other. I mean, we've played, you know, we're playing Beethoven C minor. We're
Yes.
starting our program with that piece. I mean, we've played that, hundreds of times. This is one of a very important work. The first, the Opus 1 trios, as
Yes.
is indicated by the Opus number, were the first things that Beethoven chose to publish. He'd written other works before that, but didn't think that they were quite representative of the composer that he felt he was. So the Opus 1s are the first thing, and the C minor in particular, the third of those, is really a work that shows did I think foreshadows much of what Beethoven would become. It's in C minor,
Hmm.
the same key as the Fifth Symphony, and a key, a very dramatic key, not one that Haydn, for instance, his teacher, often wrote in. It's a key that lends itself to great drama, and of course, Beethoven. What Beethoven does in this trio is he actually he exposes the very dynamic inner emotional world that was his own, and
Ah,
he puts that in the music, and then and the musicians unleash that, and that just it's actually not that hard to imagine how shocking the last movement of that C minor. It starts with this I mean, it's just frightening, and it's just full of anger. And I mean, it
oh,
has, it has contrasting ideas there that kind of balance it all out. And that's what Beethoven does. But I mean, Haydn did not um, agree that this C minor trio should be something that Beethoven should be putting out there, and
oh,
because he
wow.
thought that it was just too much. That's people aren't ready for that, for all of that emotion, and that's dark stuff. We don't want music. I mean, this is music for the societies, and I mean that's the thing. I mean, you know, Haydn's day gig was the court composer for the Esterhazy family, and that's how he was able to make ends meet. And as a result of the constraints, actually,
Sure. Yeah.
and that career trajectory, brought with it, in a castle way away from Vienna, with a
Ah,
bunch of musicians and others, and this whole court, and produce music that these people can play. And of course, there was an economy of means that he was faced with. 4 musicians, string quartet. I mean, he invented the string quartet. He just started, and he had to produce
unbelievable.
more, because there was a need, and that that created an opportunity for him to keep on diving in to that genre. 2 violins, viola, and cello. How far can you push this? And I mean,
A
I mean,
long
he
way.
was in his Opus 20s, and he was already pushing things in all sorts of interesting directions that the composers like Beethoven would then take even further. I mean, Beethoven's, late quartets, you listen to those now, and there's still aspects of that music
Amazing.
that sounds contemporary, sounds, still like it's pushing, like it's still ahead of us. I mean, it's remarkable. So this Beethoven C minor trio, Opus 1 number 3, that really it's an indication. It reflects. It's got within it. It's there are elements. There's evidence of the evolution and the transformation and the impact that Beethoven
Oh my
was to
goodness.
have on classical music. I mean, it was already, sort of transitioning into the Romantic era, and just the expressiveness that music calls for in the lines is already different than with Haydn. The role of the cello is very different. I mean, in Beethoven's mind, the instruments. I mean, the piano parts, admittedly, are always, because Beethoven was himself a pianist, and they were always challenging, from Opus 1s to Opus 97, from beginning to end, all the trios, the earlier opus, and then of course Haydn trios, and even the Mozarts to a certain degree. The cello parts are still kind of transitioning from that sort of early music period, where the cello's role was to help reinforce the lower end of the piano, or the pianoforte, which in the early days, I mean, with origins and roots and ties to harpsichords, which people understand are plucked instruments and just don't have a sustain. So what these composers wanted was to have the bowed component of the cello just supporting those low bass lines. And so in Haydn, that's usually what I'm doing. I'm chasing around, or sort of mimicking, the left hand of the piano, whereas the violin and the right hand of the piano are having very much a conversation in melody, and rhythm and all.
Wow.
And Beethoven takes that and he just spreads the goodness around to all the players, so everybody. And from that point of view, it's very much a kind of a foreshadowing of the direction that he was going with his symphonies.
Now,
Okay.
Roman, are talking about the Beethoven piece. I loved how
Yeah.
you explained that. It's just, I really want to, it makes me want to see the show more.
Good. Well, I mean,
Talking about the composers, though, you've also done, I think your second selection is by composer from Vancouver, Jeffrey Ryan.
indeed.
And can you explain a little bit of how that choice came about for you?
Yeah, I mean, we've commissioned. I mean, we've always understood as the Gryphon. I mean, we called ourselves the Gryphon Trio. I mean, so let me just back that up a little bit.
Yes.
We chose the name because we it is a reflection of a choice that we made to select a name that wasn't tied, wasn't already associated with chamber music. We wanted something that had some
Okay.
depth, and we had separate lists, and Jamie and I both had Gryphon spelt the way we spell it, Gryphon. And over the years, we've had musicologists, historians, and kids, especially after the Harry Potter movies,
Yes.
start explain to us what the attributes were. But there was the son of a musician friend of ours was just completely fascinated with Griffins long before the Harry Potter movies, and when
Okay.
they came to play, he presented us with this whole glossary of Griffin terms and types of Griffins. And in any case, guardians of treasures, some sort of a mix of cosmic energy and earthly force and things like that. Yeah, we loved all of that, and but we loved the guardians of treasures, because we do that, the Haydn, the works, the 300-year-old works that we play are very much those treasures. And so we certainly as an ensemble are are celebrating music and performing music, that we didn't write or compose. It was written by these individuals whose efforts resulted, were a response to, so sort of, to the constraints and opportunities that they were faced with in society. People wanted to, these instruments were around as part of a kind of a timeline, of an evolutionary timeline, as far as acoustic instruments, European acoustic instruments went, and people wanted to play those things together, and they enjoyed the community component of it very much so. And then the music graduated sort of from the home, and their chamber spaces within homes, to concert music. And that, Haydn was very much part of that transition. And for Beethoven, it was all, it was not music to, entertain, it's not salon music. This was serious concert music. And so it continued to evolve. But we've always understood that our role would be to champion and that music, to acquire the skill and the knowledge to interpret that music in a way that honored the whole sort of trajectory of its time with audiences and all the generations of musicians. I mean, we and also we understood that it would be a very important thing for us to work with contemporary composers who might. Amongst them, that we figured there would likely be some that would write pieces that would be somehow an indication of things to come. I think more often than not, I mean, it's been over 100 pieces of music that we've commissioned and premiered over the years, and
Really?
there's certainly, almost always been. With a few exceptions, there's occasional piece where the composer was more interested in kind of connecting with the past, and I'm having a bit of a kind of a neo-romantic kind of approach. But for the most part, the music was very much the music that the composers have written for us, been Canadians, Americans, European composers, reflections of their place in their time. And some occasions their interactions with us. They're so it's so Chimera
Yeah.
is
Is it connected with the Gryphon idea? Is that like where?
well, I mean, it's the idea of a multifaceted entity, which a chimera was, and
Okay.
that this whole is made up of separate parts. And in this piece, I guess, as with the mythical creature, different aspects of that multifaceted personality come forward at different times. And
Right.
so the piece is written out that way, that in fact is what happens musically. Jeff is a composer that we've had many opportunities to work with over the years, and not just in the context of concert music. He's also the Gryphon Trio's, I mean, we in 2010, we sort of took it upon ourselves to conceive or to come up with a project. I mean, at that point, our 20th anniversary was on the horizon, not too far away, and we thought, okay, we should come up with some sort of a community engagement project, an arts education project, that allows a group like ours, that somehow harnesses the relationships that we've evolved in all of these years with artists, with composers, with writers, with visual artists. And we'd had some great projects, Constantinople being one very significant one, which was essentially the chamber opera that we didn't know that we were creating, that eventually took us to the Royal Opera House in London. But in that, we really learned about producing and new directions that are environments that chamber groups might create for themselves. I mean,
Sure.
and we had many new relationships and many artistic and sort of creative collaborative experiences with artists that led to these relationships that we thought we might be able to create and conceive something that we might be able to bring to a community, and engage students, engage teachers, engage parents. And that thing became a program called Listen Up. And we've
Oh,
been doing that in communities all across. I mean, everywhere from, I mean, we've done it in 18 communities over the years. In the last 6 years or so, we've been doing them exclusively in Toronto, one project in Toronto and one in Ottawa.
okay.
But we've done it, I mean, in 2015, what started as a Listen Up project in Yellowknife evolved into a Listen Up project that took place not just in Yellowknife, but in Inuvik, in Hay River,
Wow.
and 3 other communities in the Northwest Territories involved. A couple of hundred kids from all of those communities, their teachers. I mean, it's an 8-month project, and essentially, it takes place typically in elementary schools, and very often in sort of 7th and 8th grades. It's an experience that those kids,
That's
when kids of that age have it, they take away a confidence from this project, which is rooted in their having experienced their own capacity to
Hmm.
express themselves through music, through words, through visual art, and to perform in a concert with us in the end in a choir, and to showcase their art
Wow.
and
That's
showcase
cool.
their capacity to recite words, often with others. I mean, all sorts. I mean, when you have a program that takes place over the course of 8 months that has this kind of structure, there's all sorts of opportunity to embrace input from teachers, from other members of the community, and it's a magical thing. Just last week, we launched our Ottawa and Toronto projects. It's always exciting to unleash them, but we've done them. We did one wonderful one up in Powell River,
Oh,
BC. Oh
yeah.
yes, I mean the land of the Cathalamu Festival. I mean, what a choir town that was. When we went there and met. Well, we were invited to play a concert there during the year one time by the organization that runs Cathalamu, and those, I mean, that whole community is fueled by people that like to make things happen, as I
I
put
was
it.
I was gonna
So,
say, Roman, you're here to be tremendously connected, but also very good at this. Like out and beyond of what you're doing. It's kind of like I come back to Chimera that you were talking about with Jeffrey Ryan. Is there a lot of like collaboration that goes on when you commission something like that to be written, or is that like
um,
you just
well,
give an
I
idea and
mean,
they come back with something?
yeah, I mean, not. I mean, it's never been the case that, I mean, that a composer has said, yeah, here's a couple of sketches, what do you think? And big conversation ensues. And I mean, we're not composers, and as much as we'd like to be improvisers, and we create opportunities for ourselves to collaborate with some great jazz musicians, and do that as often as we can. As much as they try to, I mean, what they do is just create opportunities for us to sound like kind of like we're improvising. I have to qualify that, because if any of them were to hear me, they'd say, they love playing with us and we love playing with them. We bring very different approaches to rhythm and music, but it's in any case. So we don't compose. Getting back to Jeffrey Ryan.
Right.
So for the most part, what happens is we make connections with composers. We seek them out. They seek us out.
Amazing.
We might hear something that we really love, or think is very interesting, and contact the composer and say, "Hey, would you like to write something for us?" And I mean, for many years there were 3 or 4 things a year. It was a lot.
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
it's kind of there are other major things we've done and are doing now, and there are new pieces, always new pieces in the hopper.
So
I guess it still continues to be 3 or 4, but we typically, what happens with some composers is that they'll give us something that's already quite, you know very advanced,
oh, okay.
not far from the finish line, and and we'll look at it. Or if they have specific things that they're trying to do, some new effect, if they're wanting to explore some kind of a new texture or sound and not sure how that sits, whether it's very awkward to do this thing, does it actually work? Sometimes they'll try things and ask for our feedback. And we'll give it, and things will evolve, and then the premiere will come, and sometimes there's still some feedback. There are the composers who like who are like Beethoven, weren't afraid to use an eraser, or never mind the eraser, just scratch it out and write a new thing. Then there are others that are more like Mozart, that just have sort of
They know what they want.
cultivate this they concept. They know what they want, and they just let it come out, and that's the piece for them. They're not really going to go back. I mean, we've had some composers go back and do major revisions, and so it's varied.
So
Yeah.
coming
But
back
we
to
don't. I mean, but it's not like, okay, let's go to the workshop. I mean, it's not the way. We know a lot of pop musicians and all. I mean, Jim Cregan is the bass player of the Bare Naked Ladies. He's our neighbor, lives down the
interesting.
street from me. So I mean, I know what goes on when Jim sets out. To write a piece. He'll be cranking away on something, and then he needs to take his dog for a walk in our local park here, and I run into him. He's
Well,
working on this thing.
when you say that, Roman, it reminds me of when I learned a little bit. I think Jeffrey Ryan's also written a thing called Earthshine.
Could be.
Okay, so that you're not familiar with that,
I
'cause
don't
when
know
you
this
mentioned,
piece, but he's written various things for us. That's not one of them, but it
okay,
could be.
okay. No, it's just when it kind of came up when I heard it in another discussion, you mentioned the bass player for the Bare Naked Ladies, and I was thinking the only place I've heard Earthshine from is a lyric and song written by Rush. And it was like, oh, like, is that a
Good that
connection?
they're coming back. I mean, can't
Yes.
quite imagine how it's going to be without their drummer, but I'm
You and
happy
me
that they'll
both.
be.
You and me both. I'm a big fan, but I'm not as ecstatic as everybody is about that feeling. You have another selection that you're going to do at the Matsqui Centennial Center, that is auditorium, which is from Brahms, I believe.
Actually, it's Dvorak.
Oh,
That
right.
very big trio in F minor. There is a big connection between Dvorak and Brahms. Brahms was very much Dvorak's greatest champion. Dvorak did not come through the system in the way that
Okay.
others might, and it took Brahms to sort of discover that talent, and Brahms really, I mean, supported Dvorak and was his greatest champion. So this work is there's another work that he wrote, that Dvorak wrote, called the Dumki Trio, Dumki, and that's a Dumka is a Ukrainian word that is shared with other Eastern European cultures and languages. But Dumka specifically is a sort of an epic ballad. It's actually a written and spoken form, but it's the nature of the stories and these epic ballads, great, stories of great achievement, great tragedy, heroism, and all the various, foibles and attributes of humankind captured in epic ballads in a time in sort of 19th century
Yes.
period where bards and traveling musicians would go from town to town, sort of offering these entertainments, which were stories accompanied usually by an instrument and very much folk, rooted in sort of folk melodies, but uh, Dvorak and many composers of his time were very, very interested in the spirit of this kind of folk idiom, and were integrating it into their music. It was just a thing that they discovered they could do, that they enjoyed, that was popular. So the Dumki Trio is actually a series of 6 movements rather than 4, each of which sort of has this hot and cold, or sort of a tragic and ecstatic mood in each, and so that's a trio that we play a great deal and that audiences know. But the other big trio which itself is much more sort of symphonic in its scope and huge as the F minor trio. And he wrote that after not long after his parents died, and often I mean, life and life experiences have a great bearing on the output. I mean, for a creative person, working through grief is often
Yes.
a very. I mean, for a composer, a visual artist, it's something they do through their art. You can't separate these things. You can't separate yourself from what it is that you're feeling and thinking. So the F minor is a very, very substantial work that the audiences will love. It's epic. It's 40 minutes long. The first and last. I mean, the last movement has this real sense of triumph, and you've made it through this thing, and it has joy and hope. But the first movement, brings us into this turmoiled world of angst and grief, and just a slow movement that is just it has such transcendent beauty in it. So it's a very rich program, and you could say that each of the three pieces kind of oops touches on transition. Our program and how the Beethoven,
Beautiful.
the Ryan, and the Dvorak. I mean, each piece has a kind of a transition component to it. Beethoven, very much, evolving, and transforming himself, or developing into the composer that he became. And the C minor trio is a real indication of his sort of departure from the safe compositional constraints that Haydn would have preferred that he stay within. Beethoven just jumped beyond that and was very much energizing that music with emotions that were dark as well as joyful, just a much broader range, not this polite society sort of music that's maybe just kind of eking its way from the background. This was music that's in your face because it's talking about things that are the most important to him at that moment. It's everything that Beethoven the person is wrapped up in this. In Chimera, there's this, Jeff Ryan's taken this piece, or taken the opportunity to really reflect on who we are. And he'd known us. He's written a number of major works for us, one of which we'll be performing in January, actually, with a vocal sextet from Norway called Nordic Voices that we've been collaborating with for a number of years. Actually, the very first piece that we had created for us was by Jeff Ryan, and it's a piece called Scar Tissue, big 40-minute thing. So Jeff wrote that for us. There were other string quartets actually that Annalie and I, or a quartet that we used to play when we also played in a quartet of Jeff. So we've known him for a long time, and he was for many years a composer in residence at Music Toronto here. He's originally from
He was
Ontario.
okay.
So there's much connection with Jeff. And then finally, the Dvorak, he's, there's a kind of a transformation. At the beginning of the piece, you get this sense that he was very much still embroiled or immersed in the grief that he was feeling, following the death of his parents, and at the end of the piece, I mean, he brings us to this place of sort of carry on, process that, and just keep moving with a sense of positivity. So it's a great program. Yeah.
Roman, the way you describe this makes me want to go see it tomorrow. Like, it's just like it's you just enlarged it to such a big extent, which is kind of cool. I also, just before we kind of wrap up here, you were given the doctorate at Carleton. Can you give, like, what you've expressed here? Your whole kind of world seems to be connection, which, bringing music to so many, seems like almost an obvious choice. Can you give us a little bit of idea of how you came to be even recognized with that doctorate?
Well, I mean, I think what that doctorate, or what the people who presented me with that doctorate wanted to acknowledge was the connection that I was making through the Gryphon Trio and the Ottawa Chamber Fest with the community. It was just, that was a huge part of it. It wasn't, as an artistic director and artistic and executive director, I recognized that I was not, I wasn't like some music impresario that was just, obsessed with, hiring certain artists from Europe, United States, and Canada, and invite them to play concerts, and somehow the audience comes. No, I've always been, you can't have a concert without a great audience, and building that audience, or being very sort of seeing. Considering that all of that from the audience perspective is something that I've always tried to do, and actually in Ottawa really learned to do. I learned to be I learned to really enjoy being in concerts as a member of the audience. When you're a young musician, learning and dealing with things, and still honing things, it's you're noticing things, and when you notice things in other players, often it causes there are kind of awakenings. It's like, wow, I do not do that well. So going to a concert, I don't know, for me was often it's kind of an anxious affair. I've always been a visual learner, and to go and hear somebody make sound and see how they do it, it was always a very very engaging thing for me. Always end of the seat. But when I started, the Ottawa Chamber Fest, when in my first year, that 2-week festival was the biggest chamber music festival in the world. 130 concerts in 2 weeks.
Oh man.
Yeah. So let's just say that I got that I have a certain stamina for producing things and dealing and taking projects, pulling the thing up the mountain. I've always
That's cool.
done that. And I think it's important that in our field, things, you have to be willing to work and work, to make things happen, to bring people together, to ensure that the community that is the artists on stage and the community that is the audience, that they're all, feeling that they're getting something, out of this experience, that they're engaged, that they're, really involved in the whole experience. And when that happens, what is a concert series like Music Toronto becomes something much more important for people as they start coming to those concerts. They see the same people there time and again. It's community, it's friendships. So I've always liked to make things happen. And one of my very first big undertakings, or just sort of very first time I stepped toward the opportunity, or just leaned into the opportunity to make something kind of unknown happen, was this Constantinople project that Christos Hatsis. Christos Hatsis is a colleague, a great friend and composer who teaches at the University of Toronto. Met him 30 years ago. And he right away, the conversation started, with, you got to write Anna Lee. I remember her saying, meeting Christos and saying, you got to talk to Christos. You guys will cook something up. Well, we sure did. What started as the original intent was to create a 15-minute piece, which was often those were the parameters that you would start with. That works. If you get one of those, there's a lot that you can do with that. But no, this kept growing, and Christos had just recently heard Miriam Toller, who's a singer from Cairo. Family moved over here when she was a child, and so she could sing, just unbelievable singer, could sing in all of these Middle Eastern styles, and yet went to U of T, and he'd heard her, and she was there was a piece that gave her an opportunity to really do to integrate the music of her home, of her culture, in a way that Christos heard. So long story short, was supposed to be a 15-minute piece, turned into an 85-minute kind of chamber opera
Oh, wow.
that was the trio, two singers, Miriam Toller and Patricia O'Callaghan. Finally, was the soprano that kind of settled into the work with us. And it was a whole piece about cultural convergence. I mean, Christos was working out his whole experience as
Amazing.
a Greek
Amazing.
person from that culture, growing up in Thessaloniki, witnessing the collision of Christian and Muslim cultures. And this whole piece
Oh,
explores that. And I mean, and it just goes on from there. So I had just started going to see theatrical productions by Robert Lepage, the great Canadian Quebecois
yeah.
theater maker, actor, filmmaker. And we're lucky here that he would often bring, or Harborfront used to have this theater festival
Yes.
that was a great home, a great landing for his works as they were just developing. They'd often, he basically he'd kind of he has a specific way of developing. Actually, there's somebody who really develops his work with particular artists in a room, and they all cook the thing up together, and it gets to a certain point that it just needs to be presented. And cities, there were a number of cities like Toronto that had an appetite for these the first baked versions of things. So I kind of was just picked up on that and just started just being amazed at how he told stories, how he combined, how he embraced technology actually, and used projected visuals in ways that had not really been seen before. And beyond that, when I first came back to Toronto, we were in the trio. There was enough time in the schedule that I could also play in the Canadian Opera Company orchestra, which was a great experience. It was it was the beginning of a golden age for the COC. Richard Bradshaw was the general
Yes.
director and our conductor, and the opera company was at that point Lepage had created Bluebeard a version or a staging of Bluebeard's castle. And there was Erwartung as well, this double bill that we did. And it was like, I'd never seen anything like it. There was a swimming pool on stage. There were these singers coming
Wow.
out of this pool, all of this stuff that Lepage had done. And it was incredible. So I really was paying attention. My big dream was to somehow be able to work with him, but and it kind of happened in that what I did was I just started paying attention to all the credits and who was making all those visuals. We had an idea that we wanted projected visuals in Constantinople, that would be part of the storytelling, and that we create this kind of Lepage like environment that had a chamber group embedded in this
Amazing.
staging, and
Oh,
these singers were. So I connected. I just I've never been afraid to just pick up the phone and call somebody and start
amazing.
share some reflections, talk. I mean, I love this work that Jacques Collin was doing with Lepage, and Jacques just I mean, one thing led to another, and before we knew it, Jacques was part of the team, and before we knew that, another fellow by the name of Bernard White, who was also working with Lepage, was part of our team, and Lionel Arnoux was another one, and before we knew it, Lepage's company, Ex Machina, was one of four companies helping us co-produce this. So we had Tapestry, New Opera in Toronto, Music Toronto, with which we had an association, and the Banff Center as well. And so it was, that took 4 years to develop the staging of that work, and eventually we premiered it at the Banff Center. We had like 2 huge workshops in Lepage's space in Quebec City and workshops in Toronto. I learned to, where did we get the money to make this thing that cost close to $500,000
No kidding.
to produce over all those years? So one of the things I was forced to figure out was, I mean, I wanted to do this thing, and we wrote grants, but the work that we were contemplating here, Constantinople,
Yes.
just did not fit, into any funding programs at
Yep.
the Canada Council. It wasn't. I mean, the best fit was with the opera program, but that was already so oversubscribed with major opera. I mean, opera is so expensive that there wasn't any money left in that. So we'd get these great, very encouraging responses from the Canada Council, but no money. So we had to, some very important relationships
Man.
started then, and some people that I'm aware of, and some people that I'm not aware of. There's this invisible hand in one's career when you start doing things and making it evident to people what it is that you're about and what you want to do. There are those that that are helping you, and then
Yes.
there are those that they're just a step away, but they've done something, they've said something to somebody that leads to an opportunity to meet somebody, to sit down with
Absolutely.
somebody that has the capacity then, to help you, and to,
Well said.
who well, and that's
Well said.
happened in my life, and there are people like that, that exist for all major organizations, but certainly the Gryphon Trio and now Music Toronto has that. It's a big responsibility, as well.
Yeah,
You've got
sure.
to make sure that, you're not just taking, that you've got to just keep on reinforcing that the vision is one that's solid. Of course, there are boards of directors and colleagues in these organizations that you know help shape that direction, but ultimately very often it's got to be one person who's just somebody who's just continually getting up in the morning, and maybe having not slept because that thing has been
Won't go
bouncing
away.
around. I mean, that's one of the problems with being, an idea guy who wants to make things happen. So you load up all this stuff and it's just bouncing around, and it makes for interesting life, that's for sure, but incredibly rewarding. And I guess as you go, the projects tend to not get smaller; they tend to get bigger. And my
Yep.
biggest project, really, I'd say, has been the kind of um, taking Music Toronto into its new phase.
Okay.
It was a great organization, and it was led and it was run by some very committed, highly professional and knowledgeable people. But there was a very small number of them, and so what I've tasked myself with is, just to create actually an administration, a team here that can actually make all of this go. That might make, to have a team would suggest that we would that all this entire venture, and that something like Music Toronto would be much more sustainable, not relying on, you know, the work of just two people, but maybe a
Right.
whole group of people and a group of supporters and group of artists. And I think chamber music is, in this day and age, small ensembles have so much. There's so many tools, and there's so much power to connect with audiences. That's really changed over the course. Earlier in our conversation, we just breezed by this whole notion. We're talking about social media and how that didn't exist
Yes.
when we started. Websites and email did not exist
I
when
know.
Jamie and I were passing where our lists for that had different names on it. Guess what? We used a fax machine,
Oh,
with a piece of paper. Here's my list of stuff, and I mean, sure, we were in the early years of personal computing those days, but I mean, who could imagine just how that would change the world, and how that would,
no.
in some ways,
Crazy.
create new opportunities. I mean, perhaps democratize certain things. I mean, now, a pop artist, a singer songwriter, a chamber group, you've you've got to spend time on all of these other things, connecting with your audience and maintaining those connections, and it changes who you are, and changes it defines your trajectory as a creative artist. The fact that you have to do this work, the fact that you're so close, the fact that you're not isolated in some corner and just doing the thing that you want,
It's
never mind what
amazing.
anybody else thinks. And and if it wasn't, I mean, certain artists, wouldn't, I mean, and art and the impact that certain people created with their work when they were siloed in that way,
Yes. Yeah.
has had an incredible bearing on the rest. I mean, Haydn was one of those people. Haydn was isolated in the
Yeah.
Esterhazy castle very often with his family. That's where they were. That's where their whole court was. It was far outside of Vienna, and he didn't have couldn't go and listen to
Yeah.
anything else that was going on, and he was just in this focused world. He was isolated, and from that came, as he dug deeper into the string quartet, he evolved this whole potential for a classical, chamber ensemble and how that might all function.
Well,
So,
when Roman,
it's an interesting time.
when you say that, Roman, it's very interesting that as you describe Haydn, that is kind of the picture that many have of the artist, right? The isolated, the in the cabin, by themselves, writing these illustrious things. And what I'm kind of think is very cool is that Carlton recognized
A
you
socially awkward, eccentric,
for your ability to bring all of this together. Though to me it's one of the things that you've given such a background here of like, oh, you don't just go up on the stage and play because you can know how to do it. Like there's so much that goes on. My question though is this Constantinople that you said is going to be performed in January, are you going to record this?
No, that's actually, it's not Constantinople. That's Scar Tissue that
Oh,
we're
sorry,
performing
sorry,
with the
sorry,
Nordic
yes.
Voices. Yeah.
So are you going to record either of these? Like as far as
I
Constantinople
hope we
or
do.
Scarpa?
Recording's kind of an interesting thing. We've recorded a great deal
Yes.
over the years, and very very honored to have received a bunch of Juno awards
Yes.
and recognition for the recording that we did. We're in an interesting moment right now. We have a bunch of stuff that we want to release, but again, the pandemic is still something that we're
Okay.
that's still or some of the things that happened during the pandemic. Our label was sold to a European label, and we're just
Okay.
figuring out. That's going to take a lot of my attention as the hustler in the group to figure out where we want to release. We've got all the Brahms trios and this Dvorak F minor trio. Actually, we have recorded, but we haven't released it yet. So
Okay.
that's a whole, I mean, since our last release, which is now, pre-pandemic, things have changed tremendously, and it's going to take some study and some real strategy to figure out what we want to do with our career as recording artists. As we consider what we, all the things that we might want to still do
Yeah.
in the coming years as we're all
You know
continuing
what's
to play
amazing with this
in the
conversation
Gryphon
in many
trio.
ways, Roman, is that you're in your 33rd year as the Gryphon Trio. And in talking to you today, you sound like you're just getting started. Like you have so much stuff to do yet. It's kind of neat
I
hearing
know
that come
there's a
through.
lot to do,
Does it like
and I
you
haven't even.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was
No,
gonna say it's kind of like you
keep
started
going.
with. It's like how I go to science and I talk about entropy, and as time goes on, things tend to get more and more chaotic and disorderly, and there's more that comes about. And your description from your early start to where you are today seems to have done exactly that to me. Like you have so many things to do. Like where do you fit them all in?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a anyhow, it's a lot of stuff, and sometimes, it can be I mean, something, I must say that's something that's a big priority for me now, is finding people to work with
I'll bet.
that share, or that are inspired by what it is that I'm doing, and who provide inspiration to me because they're able to help me make these things happen, and because they bring their own experience, and we have great brainstorming sessions. I mean, for me, getting on the phone, I mean, this is a weird thing that's really evolved. When I started with the Ottawa Chamber Fest, I mean, I was like a phone machine. I would just call people. I mean, 130 concerts. That was a lot of phone
Oh
calls.
my goodness.
And, you called, people would answer. Now you send an email and people respond, and then maybe you set up a time to have a phone chat. But I was the master of the cold call. I was just, I mean, and Rogers was the greatest, Rogers was the greatest beneficiary of that. I did in my first year. I racked up $10,000 worth of phone bill.
Oh man.
It sort of innocently had no idea. I just kept on doing the thing, and because we were traveling, I had to use this thing, and the roaming charges. I mean, they were just
Staggering.
we were not going to get into this whole situation we have in this country with certain near monopolies.
Yes.
In any case,
I was going to say,
it was a business expense. What can I say?
Absolutely.
And I got lots of things done.
I was going to say I would
But
love to do.
anyhow,
Go ahead. No, I would just I was going to say you've given me well over an hour, despite some of the challenges we've had with technology. But I just want to kind of I'll wrap up a little bit with is there anything that so we've got the shall we say the Valley Concert Society performance coming up Friday, November 14th, 7:30. If you're in Abbotsford, I'm telling you, after you've listened to what Roman has to say, if you're not excited to go and see this performance, I would be very, very shocked. There's so much to actually get to see that. That's at the Matsqui Centennial Auditorium. With that, Roman, you've given me a lot of what I'm now really recognizing as precious time today to talk to us. Is there anything that you would like to kind of wrap up with, whether it be the performance that's upcoming, to possibly youth that are upcoming musicians, or even just to the idea of this chamber music and this it's an area in music that if you go and see it and you're not blown away by it, you're not listening to music properly. And just on your in your own words.
That's the thing about great chamber music is that it actually, I think it's a great genre because there's, typically it happens in a smaller space and you're closer to the musicians. There isn't the distraction of a cast of 100, say, in an orchestra. Orchestral sound is, there's
Yes,
hardly anything on the planet that can, you listen to a Mahler symphony or, that's a whole special thing all onto its own, and a magical thing that, with the help of, one conductor to bring a whole force like that. Well, we don't have that person. We don't actually need that person because there's only four of us. And in a sense, the inner circle of a great string section in a great orchestra, they, as much as they do, they play with the conductor. They do actually play as a chamber group there, and then everybody behind them follows them as well. This kind of listening and, being inside your own sound, being inside the collective and the whole is something that happens at a different scale. But chamber music, there's such an intensity, and you can see, as an audience that comes and you sit in a room and you just sometimes the silence. If a newcomer comes to a chamber music concert, that's sometimes a very surprising thing because we're not amplified.
Yes.
And just those that have been to these concerts before know that, okay, don't make a sound. And then that's such a notable thing, almost uncomfortable for some, to go into a room. Usually, if you go to any other kind of concert, there's always a shum, a noise, and then you go to a big pop concert. God, you can make all the noise you want, and and that wouldn't get in the way of the performance. But here, you've got to become aware of yourself in the space, the sounds that you might be making. Absolutely. Or not. You can almost hear your own heartbeat, and then you get focused like that. And it's rare. It's actually one of the things that I think people are starting to discover about going to live music, that's acoustic, that requires that kind of attention. It's it's just such a special opportunity
Oh yeah.
to, rather than just, having these little 3-4 minute little episodes that are pop songs, which
Yes.
I love. Here you have something like the Dvorak that's in 4 big chunks that collectively are 40 minutes. And, you get yourself into that zone, and it's just such a beautiful way to just separate yourself from all of the noise that is life on this planet right now. I mean, it really is. I mean, I think it serves and offers a whole new purpose these days. It's just something to focus on, to lose yourself in, to watch it be made, to watch the interaction, to watch the emotion of the music, to watch all of it. I think it's like a 2 hour,
Yes.
it's
It's
an
losing
enrichment.
yourself.
It's not an escape, but you get, without even knowing it, you can leave the noise that's in your head and in your heart behind and be transformed by these beautiful creations that are these works of music that we're playing, and be kind of engaged in our efforts to bring that music to life for the audience. Now, so that's something I can go on about, but I have to say, I mean, you clearly have an audience that's all over the place. So I'm sure that people might be aware that we're playing in other places in
Yes.
BC as well during that period, and they can go to our website and learn about that. We'll be in the Okanagan, we'll be in Maple Ridge and Kamiq. But you had asked about younger artists, and
Yes.
something actually that we're doing more often. It kind of stems a bit from the work. One of the pillars that I've introduced at Music Toronto is an artist development pillar. So there's the concerts, that's one pillar, artist development, a second pillar, and community engagement and education,
Oh
a
my,
third pillar, and they're
that's
all
cool.
equally important. But the artist development pillar, through the artist development pillar, I've created an opportunity to invite earlier career, let's just say, not necessarily, first things, not just out of university, already doing things and out there and thinking about who they want to be and what the challenges are
Right.
as small ensemble musicians. And so I have these residencies where I invite an ensemble, and I put them together with interesting mentors. I talk to them about, curation and creating programs in interesting new ways, and getting some feedback to perhaps their ideas and notions. Might this work? Might that work? Can we try it? So you get people like Tom Allen, who's quite well known,
Yes.
radio host, but
Yes.
also a great
Yep.
curator and really knows about the business of talking about music and conveying
Very true.
ideas through music with the kind of clarity
Hmm.
that you might when you speak. And that's Tom's great at that. We've got Marie-Josée Chartier, who's a choreographer and producer and stagecraft person who works with these people and helps them recognize that when you go into a theater somewhere, and perhaps in the prairies, and some small venue, you come into this place, it's the greatest place that community has. How can you make the most of it? Are there lights
Oh
there?
yes.
Is there a lighting guy? Is there a sound guy? What can you do to make the most of it? In any case, one of our residency artists last year was the duo Mycelia, and they are Isabella Perron and Simon Ghidorah, and who are a couple, and I think engaged, incredibly gifted
Oh
musicians. They
man.
were studying here in Toronto at the Gould School, and before that in various other places. And both of them play the violin, both of them are singers, and both of them play the piano. And so they had one
Oh
of
wow.
these, they were our residency ensemble in the spring.
Oh.
And a whole relationship evolved from that. They are actually, they live on Sunshine Coast.
Oh. Okay.
Um,
That's
and
cool.
so what we did with this tour, we had a day free at the end of this period, and I reached out to them. I said, "Listen, we're wrapping things up on the 16th. We're in Kamiq, and we've got a couple of days. Why don't we come up to Gibson's or wherever you're living,
Yes.
and why don't we'll come up. We'll just bring ourselves there, and why don't we cook something up?" And so Simon and Isabella have come up with this whole thing, and we're doing a concert there, which actually it's just starting to be promoted as well for anybody in the Gibsons. neighborhood.
Cool.
We're going to present a concert that's like a curation. It's a mix of all sorts of interesting things, everything from, Isabella's favorite, pop song arranged for, the whole ensemble to movements of Dvorak quintet. I think Isabella and I are going to play a couple of movements of the Ravel duo. And so really taking that very deliberate approach to curation and not being afraid to take a movement of this and a movement of that and creating a string
Beautiful.
of musical experiences that somehow tie into one another, that follow each other, that are interspersed by ideas that are expressed and recited in some way. So that'll happen at a place called the High Beam Dreams at 7:30 on the 18th. That's
Of
right. So
November.
so that's Gryphon Trio, reaching out, trying to, having fun working with these younger generation
Unbelievable.
musicians. Ryan Davis is another one. He's a wonderful violist who also developed a whole um, looping. Looping is a thing that exists in pop music, but there are all sorts of instrumentalists that have taken that on. So Ryan is actually the viola faculty at UBC in Vancouver now,
Oh,
which
okay.
happened, but he's toured around with us and we've done things like that with him. So that's something we're also very passionate about, is creating opportunities to work with and support first and foremost, and if possible engage and work with artists that are sort of perhaps closer to the beginning of their career than we might be.
I think we're going to have to land this.
Yeah.
So this has been a wonderful discussion today. I was going to say, to me, you've just opened the whole thing up. You said about losing yourself in a concert, and I think that kind of captures our world today. We're so into our media, our phones and stuff, but in coming to see the Gryphon Trio, especially I'll say at Matsqui Centennial Center, this is again
Yep.
November 14th. It's a Friday night at 7:30. You won't be sorry that you bought that ticket and came to this. As you said, there's no amplification. It's just the musician with their instruments. It'll be a wonderful thing. And again, Roman, I can't thank you enough. It's been
Well,
great.
you're very welcome. It's been great to speak with you, and we're very, very pleased to be coming back to this venue. This is an organization that's been so dedicated to continuing to nurture an audience and nurture appreciation, create opportunity for audiences to experience chamber
Absolutely.
music. That takes a certain courage these days, given the pressures that are out there, and given that there are just so many choices. But one of the great things about this repertoire is that it's stood the test of time. It's had an opportunity, and the people like us
No
who've
kidding.
had the privilege to play it have just continued to bring it, to life. And it's there's and it's just great stuff. There's a reason that it's lasted, that it continues to engage and speak to people the way it does, and it's going to be our great pleasure to share all of this music with the audience. And I hope everybody who's listening to this podcast and we'll be there. And we love it. We can't. It's one of the great things. You come to a community and you get a sense of the energy in the hall, and usually we say a few things just before we even get started, just to get people a sense of who we are, just to kind of break down, just make that
Sure.
connection.
Absolutely.
But it's after that first piece when you get that reaction, you can just hear how people have been listening, and then just, they're excited, we're excited that they're excited, and then you move on to the next thing, and the adventure continues. And anyhow,
Roman,
looking forward to it.
Roman, I can't wait. I was going to say, and hopefully I get a chance to meet you in person that evening
Yes.
as well. With that, I'm going to wrap up this session with Of Better Than Not. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Roman Borys talk about the Gryphon Trio and all about chamber music. Amazing what we've learned today. Again, I hope you'll subscribe to Better Than Not so you can listen on my YouTube channel and so you can listen to more episodes like this. And again, thank you, Roman. Bye for now.
You're very welcome.
Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.